My rehab cost me $29,281, and this is things I learned in rehab, lesson one. This is one of the most important things I took from rehab. It's one of the most important things I learned and I've continued to use in my recovery. It's one of the foundations, one of the pillars of my recovery that I still rely on to this day. And the funny thing is, I actually learned it in rehab. I didn't understand it and start using it until 6 months after I finished rehab, after I got out. So let me give you a bit of context. So my addiction was just getting out of control. 2021, I'd done everything. There was no way back. I went to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting face to face, and I said to everybody there, if my wife is awake when I get home tonight after this meeting, I'm going to tell her everything. I'm driving down my street. I pull up outside my house and all the lights are off. And I'm full of relief. I'm like, yes, another day. I survive another day. It didn't change anything about the amount of damage I'd done, about the depths of my addiction. It just gave me one more day of freedom of not having to come clean to my wife. I go inside, I turn the key, I go inside. And what I didn't realize was the kitchen, which is at the back of the house, which I can't see from the front of the house when I pull up, the light was on in the kitchen. There was no getting away from it. I'd said to the boys, GA, I was going to do it, so it was time to face up. My wife was in the kitchen at the sink. I sat down at the table, came clean, told her everything. She is 5 months pregnant with our second daughter at this point. She just collapses to the floor. She's in a huddle on the floor. I immediately jump out of my chair to get over there to console her, and she just screams at me to leave her alone, to get away from it. And that moment was just gut-wrenching. Even just thinking about it now, I can remember it so well. It was so horrifying. It was a real rock bottom moment that I bounced back from. So obviously there's not much talking that goes on that night. My wife doesn't want anything to do with me. I go to work as usual the next day. When I come home, my bags are packed all at the front door. I fear the worst, think this is it, my relationship's over. I'm not going to be living with my daughter or my soon-to-be-born daughter. And my wife tells me, you're going to live with your uncle, who luckily for me lived in North Sydney. I'm going to live with him for a couple of weeks until I can get a spot booked at a rehab centre. If I go to rehab, I complete rehab. Once I get out, I can come back home and start rebuilding my life. To me, it's a no-brainer. I want my wife in my life. I want to live with my 2 children. Where do I sign? Where's the dotted line? About 2.5 weeks go by, and I end up going to rehab. So my friend from Gamblers Anonymous actually takes me up there and drops me off. It's pretty terrifying. I'm going for a 3-week inpatient program. I don't actually know what to expect. It's like first day of school. I see the receptionist. I get guided into the waiting room and sat down. I'm just sitting there waiting for, for a therapist or whoever to come out and speak to me. While I'm sat in there, another person actually comes to reception to sign into rehab. And I'm sitting there and I recognize the accents. I'm thinking it's not another Scouser, but it's an accent from the northwest of England. Bear in mind, I'm on the beach in Sydney, Australia at this point. And it turned out the guy checking in was from Chester. That was pretty reassuring. That was a really good thing that happened for me straight away. It was like, wow, I'm going in with someone now. So we sort of went in together. And for the first week of rehab, I followed him around like a lost puppy. I'm sure he's watching this laughing now. We all got sat in a room and got told that there was somebody coming in who'd been into our rehab centre. I think it was 2 years or 2.5 years previous. And he was still clean. He was coming in to give his story, to tell us what his story was before rehab, what he learned in rehab, and how his life's been since rehab. We got told he was struggling with drink and drugs when he came to rehab. So I was a bit skeptical. I was like, it's not quite gambling, but I'm sure I'll still learn something from it. So I went to the talk. He was this surfer dude. I've already told you I was in Sydney, Australia on the beach. He's this like surfer dude. He speaks different to me. He looks different. His addiction was different. So I was listening to him, but I wasn't really taking it in. However, he was a really good storyteller. And that's the reason that I stayed there. I stuck with it and carried on listening. And I'm so glad he did. He opened up with this line. He said, there are 3 types of people in this rehab centre right now. There are people who are here to stay out of jail. There are people who are here who've been ordered to be here by the courts. There are people who are here who are here to please others, to please their family members, to keep somebody in their life. And there are people here who genuinely want to get sober. As soon as he said that, I immediately thought of my friend that I mentioned that came in. He was there because he genuinely wanted to get sober. He hadn't been caught out by his family members. He decided enough was enough. He didn't want to live that life anymore. He genuinely wanted to get sober. I immediately thought of him when I got told that. I was stuck for myself. I was at my number 2, my number 3. I'm somewhere in the middle. I gave myself the benefit of the doubt. And I was like, I'm here because I genuinely want to get sober. And my friend that I speak about, who shall remain nameless, it's now 2025. Next month, all being well, he will be 4 years clean of drink and drugs from the date we entered the rehab center. So I just want to give a shout out to him. I love you. You know who you are. So anyway, I come out of rehab after my 3 weeks, and 6 months later, I've learned so much while I'm in there, but I haven't really put it into practice. I've learned so much in rehab. I've changed my attitude towards my addiction, but I just haven't put it into practice. And 6 months later, I get back into what I was doing, to online cryptocurrency, and I end up gambling again, and I relapse. So 6 months later, I have to do it all over again. I have to come clean. I have to tell my wife what's going on. I realized in that moment, I went to rehab to please my wife. I went to rehab because my wife told me that she would leave. She'd take my children and she'd leave. I went to rehab to please her. I went to rehab to keep my children in my life. I went to rehab to please others. My family that was 17,000 kilometers away, I didn't want to put any more stress on my mum's shoulders. She'd been dealing with my addiction for 20 years. I went in to please everybody else, basically. I realized in that moment, I now don't want to live this life anymore. I realized the motivation has to come from within. I genuinely want to get sober. I genuinely want to get better because I don't want to live this life anymore. It can't be external circumstances that you're basing your recovery on. Examples of external circumstances would be money. After every gambling binge, I've lost loads of money. I hate gambling. I never want to do it again. Money comes and goes. A few weeks later, I've got money again. I've got the urge to gamble. And you haven't got the motivation to stay stopped anymore. That's why it has to come from within. It has to be internal. The fear and the shame of the addiction, of the secrecy, the isolation, it's just not long lasting enough to keep you on the straight and narrow. It's got to come from within. So the lesson that I learned is I need to genuinely want to get sober for myself. I don't want to live that chaotic life anymore. I don't want to live that secret, isolating life. If I get a win, I can't tell anyone. I certainly can't tell my nearest and dearest. If I have a loss, I certainly cannot tell anyone close to me. It's just, no matter what happens, I've got to keep it a secret. I hated that life. I decided I don't want to live that life anymore. I don't want to be all alone, the only one knowing what's going on. I want to tell all my loved ones what's going on. I sat my wife down and I told her 95% of what was going on. There was one thing, that 5%, there was one thing that I held back. I've spoke about it there's a thumbnail on the screen now. Spoke about it in another video. I'll link that in the description down below. You can see how that turned out for me, holding that 5% back, which I then told my wife about 6 months later. If you're in a similar situation, please go down to the description at the end of this video and give that a watch. You can find out what the consequences or benefits are of holding stuff back. But the internal motivation is the reason that I am still here today, because it makes me accountable to myself. There's no external pressures that can make me go and relapse because I am in control of it, because my motivation comes from within. So I can take responsibility for my recovery, and I don't have to blame others. If you've quit gambling and haven't been able to sustain recovery, comment below. Why do you think it was unsustainable, and what are you doing differently now? All right, this is my series, Things I Learned in Rehab. This was lesson 1. If I've recorded it, lesson 2 should be up here on the screen now. If you've got the bandwidth to take in another lesson, please click that one, and I'll see you in that video.